Welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, hopefully you enjoyed that marathon episode I put out earlier this week. It's so fun. I don't really have a plan when I start talking here. I kind of have a loose outline of what I want to talk about, and then I just go into it. And to be fair, I don't really time it. So I sat there, I was going on some rant, and then I'm looking at the clock, and I'm like, oh my God, I've talked for an hour. So I like keeping the show to about 40, 50 minutes. That's about right. And again, it's all feel. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I didn't go to podcast school, so forgive me if I don't, have all the I's dotted and T's crossed. But anyway, I am going to be out all next week, so I wanted to go ahead and get another show out. And to be fair, there was a bunch of interesting stuff that dropped that I wanted to comment on. And I guess I can just go ahead and start the show with that, because I saw this clip the other day, just a totally just unreal clip. And I guess I had to laugh because it's stunning, but it's really not stunning. Because I guess at this point in the narrative, I don't even know why I'm surprised anymore. But so I see this clip. So here's Dr. Jill Biden. She slithers out from under her rock and sticks her snout on CBS the other day. Dr. Jill Biden. Jill Biden, the doctor, is somehow sought out by CBS as a legitimate news organization for her luminosity on politics. But here's Jill Biden on CBS talking about the infamous 2024 debate, that infamous 2024 debate with Biden and Trump. And in that debate, if you'll remember, it was on display for the entire world. Joe Biden came across as a mental incompetent. And I hate saying that about a president, but that's what it looked like. Joe Biden, the cadaver, came across as a senile old man in front of the entire world. Well, here's Jill Biden talking about that debacle at the debate. Here's Dr. Jill Biden, quote, "As I watched it, I thought, oh my God, he's having a stroke. And it scared me to death," end quote. As I watched it, I thought, oh my God, he's having a stroke, and it scared me to death. Man, that is unbelievable from this person. Jill Biden, you watch. Jill Biden is going to go down in history as one of the worst people ever. That is an absolutely unreal statement for that woman to come out with now. And the thing that blows my mind about, go watch the clip. It's everywhere on social media. You watch this woman say this about, I thought he was having a stroke, and the reporter doesn't even follow up. You just have this like airhead reporter from CBS that's just like smiling and nodding along. Oh yeah, you thought he had a stroke? Oh, that's terrible. The reporter's like, instead of like this, Jill Biden is dropping a nuclear bomb of news in front of this reporter. And the reporter, instead of actually jumping on the news, she's sitting there looking concerned for Jill's well-being. She's worried about Jill's struggle. It's not about the lie that she foisted on the country. It's brave Dr. Jill telling her truth to the camera. Jill Biden is carrying her cross uphill in the snow both ways. This whole thing was obviously very scripted. Jill Biden doesn't do anything without a script. So this was all very intentional, probably from some kind of crisis management people, because there's no other way that you would go out and provide that type of solicited comment. Because if you look at everything, if you look at the long scope of the last 10 years, if you want to talk about waking people up from the matrix, that debate moment where Joe Biden malfunctioned on live TV was the ultimate wake-up call. Everybody at that point, it should have been obvious to anybody watching with two eyes and a brain. Everybody knew at that moment that Joe Biden was a vegetable. But if you had been paying attention to politics and paying attention to what they were doing, you already knew that. Conservatives, America First, the base, we'd all been screaming about it. We're like, look at this guy, looks like a dementia patient. But the media lied to everybody about it. That was really the big lie. Biden was a dementia patient 4 years before that when he was running for office in 2020. He was a dementia patient in 2019, and by 2024, he was a walking corpse. It was the ultimate gaslighting. The media sat there gaslighting you. And what you really had was a dementia patient in Joe Biden that was propped up by the Democrat machine. Joe Biden was a puppet. It was, it was like Weekend at Bernie's, but in the White House. You had a dementia patient. If you go back to 2019, you had a dementia patient that somehow won 81 million votes in 2020, but didn't campaign. He did zero press unless it was totally scripted, friendly interviews. It is the ultimate puppet of the state. Joe Biden was a dementia patient that was a puppet of the state. He was a puppet of the establishment, puppet of the media, puppet of the party. And obviously, he was a puppet of Jill Biden. Joe Biden was signing executive orders that he didn't even read. He signed bills. He appointed a Supreme Court justice. Joe Biden's presidency, when you look at it historically speaking, we've never seen anything like this in American politics. This was leadership in the executive by proxy. It was a committee that was running the White House, not a person. It wasn't a single executive. You had a bunch of committees, a bunch of experts that were running the country for 4 years. It was a team of handlers. So you had handlers, experts, committees that let in 30 million illegals. You had a committee of experts that called you a racist for breathing. A committee of experts that called you an insurrectionist for voting for Donald Trump. And these people told you for 5 years not to trust your own eyes. That's basically what they were telling you to do. Don't trust your own two eyes. Put on your mask of obedience and roll up your sleeve. The party has spoken. That's the end of the discussion. Because it's not about Joe Biden. It's about the message. It's about the party. It's about the state. And the real problem here is the media. The media went right over the cliff with the establishment narrative. The media became an organ for the state. That's exactly what they were doing in 2019. They were carrying water for a cadaver. This is the same media that told you 2020 was legit, that Hunter Biden's laptop was fake, that masks and vaccines worked, that the border was closed, that Biden is cognizant. Do you remember the buildup to the debate in 2024? I certainly do, because the media sat there and told me that Joe Biden, the consummate professional, was prepping with his crack team of debate people. But that Biden was the policy wonk, that he was the expert debater, the political veteran, the savvy political wonk. That somehow Joe Biden, this cool professional, is going to dazzle Donald Trump, the liar. The media built this narrative for you before the debate. That's what they prepped you to believe. They told you this was the best version of Biden. And then what happened? The debate happened. Within minutes of that debate starting, the entire lie that Joe Biden was cognizant was laid bare. It was on full display for everybody that the president of the United States was a vegetable. There was absolutely nowhere to hide for the Democrat Party, for the media, for anybody. Tens of millions of people watched that with their own two eyes. Because within minutes of Joe Biden opening his mouth in that debate, every rabid Democrat, every partisan Democrat saw reality laid bare. They saw applesauce brain. They saw the media lies totally exposed. Again, January 6th, the same people, January 6th, 2020, COVID, Hunter Biden's laptop. They told you Biden didn't have dementia. And Trump, to be fair, crushed this guy. Do you remember what Trump said? Quote, "I'm not sure what he just said. I'm not sure he knows either," end quote. And to be fair, Trump really, I think, pulled his punch. He really did. He could have made an absolute mockery of Joe Biden, and he didn't. And to be fair, Joe Biden deserved it. So you kind of forget about that whole event because it was a couple years ago, and so many crazy, it's like every week you have a new insanity that's dropped on your head. But that was like a pivotal moment in U.S. history. And so here we have Jill Biden, Dr. Jill. Here she comes out and says this now. So Jill Biden is observing her husband on a debate stage in 2024, and she's now saying that she thought he was having a stroke. She thought he was having a stroke. So Dr. Jill was blissfully unaware of Joe Biden's malady? She's a doctor, right? None of it passes the smell test. Jill Biden obviously knew his capacity. She knew beforehand, man. But here she is with CBS and a compliant reporter rewriting history and lying yet again. She's now saying that she thought Joe Biden was having a stroke on national TV. If she thought that this man was having a stroke, then why didn't they take him to get checked out? They didn't run right to it. If your spouse is having a stroke, I would think that the next thing that you would do is go to a hospital or to a medical professional. You know where they went? They went to a Waffle House. They went to a Waffle House to a post-debate party, and she said on camera, quote, "You did a great job. You answered every question," end quote. Joe Biden at that Waffle House looked like an ambulatory mummy. He looked like a total zombie. And the only conclusion you can draw with any of this, Jill Biden is a bold-faced liar. Again, if this woman thought that this man was having a stroke, then why didn't she get him checked out? Why wasn't he sent to a hospital? And the answer is completely obvious if you care about America and care about your children's future. It's all a lie. The wizard was exposed behind the curtain. You weren't supposed to see that. And the funny thing about it's not even funny, but Dr. Jill Biden was the orchestrator of a scam. She was the architect. Jill Biden, you now know, was the ringleader of an attempt by this party, by this class of people to deceive the American people. Do you remember the media's excuses after this? Because everybody saw it. I remember the postmortem afterwards because I was watching MSNBC. That's always the best place to go. Well, he had COVID. He had jet lag. It was one excuse after the other by the media. And they even said that he did a good job. It was all nonsense and it was all obvious lies. And this type of thing is exactly why the Democrat Party is polling at 20%. But Biden on the debate stage, malfunctioning, short-circuiting, was the lie in prime time. It was all exposed. You cannot unring that bell. You can't unring the bell of what happened in the debate. And here's Dr. Jill Biden out of here rewriting history to some hack CBS shill. And this is the same CBS, mind you, that lied going to the debate. It's lie, lie, lie. It's just too many lies, man. Even CNN was calling BS on this whole thing. Here's Abby Phillips, who is a complete partisan on CNN. So here's Abby Phillips on CNN. Quote, this is CNN. Quote, "It's the first time we've heard her express any concern about that debate that ultimately ended Joe Biden's 2024 campaign. But that stands in stark contrast to what Jill Biden had to say moments after the debate," end quote. Yeah, that's right, Abby. Glad you woke up from your coma. Shame on you for lying about it. Shame on all these people in the media. They're still lying today. The chain of logic here is so obvious. You had a dementia patient and an applesauce brain with nuclear codes. You had Biden, the mush brain, playing war against Putin, playing war with a nuclear power. And if you want to look at it that way, Joe Biden was obviously not in control of the presidency. So the question then you want to ask yourself is, who was? Who was really running the country when Joe Biden was there? Did they have your best interest in mind? Did Joe Biden faithfully execute the law? Because it became obvious that Biden couldn't run after that. He had to drop out. There's no way you could continue with that guy another 4 years. You couldn't continue them. You want to lead him straight to the retirement ward. So totally cynically, after this whole thing is exposed on live TV, the Democrat Party made Joe Biden resign one way or the other. They made Joe Biden quit. And what did they do? There was no primary. They didn't ask the voters what they wanted. They didn't exercise democracy. What they did is they installed a Muppet named Kamala Harris, who was a DEI hire to begin with. So they install Kamala Harris, and what happened? The same media that we're talking about here that lied to you about Biden started talking to you about all the joy. So much joy for Kamala. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It would make Pravda blush. It was so stunning. Biden is totally perfect. The lies exposed, and then what they do is they don't even say, hey, we got that one wrong. They just feed you another one. They think you're stupid. Kamala Harris is the saver. Don't you know that? She's the perfect vessel for liberalism. All this joy. And if you don't vote for Kamala Harris, then it's very obvious that you're a racist, sexist bigot. Remember how much money they spent? They spent $1 billion to prop up Kamala Harris as the vessel. As the next figurehead, they spent $1 billion for Kamala Harris to lose, man. If there's a more cynical mask-off moment in U.S. politics, I would love to know what it is. And it's really not U.S. politics. It's really in media. It's a compliant media that is carrying water for the Democrat Party and liberalism in the United States. And it's just so interesting because I don't know another time where you saw the machine gears totally exposed. I mean, yeah, you can pick COVID apart like this part or that part or whatever it is. And I'm sure whoever it is has a counterpoint. But there was no escaping the fact that Joe Biden is a dementia patient. It was the establishment, the DC class establishment, the deep state in its full glory on display for you to watch. The uniparty that runs our government with their media lapdogs, it's just absolutely unbelievable. Usually, I can tell you, this is why I watch the response, because the opposite of whatever the media is saying is usually the truth. You can trust that science. And I guess my only reason for bringing this up is shame on Jill Biden. She doesn't care about our country, and she doesn't really care about her husband, apparently. Because if she cared about him and she thought he was having a stroke, she should have taken him into a hospital. But really, let's be clear. Jill Biden doesn't care about anyone else. She only cares about herself. She lied all over the place in 2024, and she keeps lying. And this is exactly why nobody in the United States believes anything anymore. Any credibility of anything has been completely torched. The media is sitting here in a free country feeding you disinformation and then telling you that they're the source of truth. They're spewing disinformation and telling you everything that disagrees with their narrative is disinformation. It is the most circuitous logic ever. And again, this is no hey, I'm not propping up Republicans here because I hate the Republican Party just as bad. But you have to start looking at what's going on with Democrats and the media and what's going on here with all these lies. Telling me that was a one-off episode in that debate is so lame. First it was COVID, then it's jet lag. Jill thought he's having a stroke. No, he was a dementia patient that was in a diminished capacity. And everybody in America saw it live. We saw it live, Dr. Jill. Go lie somewhere else. But you watch her very closely because she's a chief architect of a major league problem in U.S. politics and U.S. society more broadly. So switching gears, we have all witnessed the abject failure that is the U.S. Senate. And specifically this Senate body, because the Senate broadly over the course of 250 years has done some pretty good things. But this particular version of the Senate is a complete joke. The rhino creatures that are currently infesting the Senate right now are sitting on the SAVE Act. And I think everybody understands that SAVE Act would require proof of citizenship to vote in our elections. That is a bipartisan issue. I've addressed it so many times on the show. That is supported 90% red, 75% blue. Everyone, regardless of political stripe, wants the SAVE Act. They want to know that citizens only are voting in elections. The interesting thing about it, it's not just red senators, the rhinos. There are 0 0 blue senators that are supporting an issue that their party supports at 75%. And red leadership, because they're the majority, are unwilling to do the hard work to whip that issue. They don't want to whip on an issue with 90% support from red. So they're lazy or they don't care. So they're deliberately defying the same red voter base that gave them a historical mandate. And what you're seeing now play out in U.S. politics is that the rhino establishment's inability to seize this moment has all of these establishment rhino hacks getting primaried. John Cornyn was one of them. John Cornyn out of Texas is a chief rhino. He's a head rhino. He just got demolished in the state of Texas by Ken Paxton, who was backed by Trump. It's an incumbent rhino senator getting absolutely destroyed by the base. John Thune, Mitch McConnell, 2 major league scumbag rhinos, spent $100 million. They spent $100 million in the state of Texas to get their pal Cornyn through the primary. They spent $100 million for John Cornyn to get blown out by Ken Paxton. And hopefully that serves as proof to everybody that's listening to this that the rhino class of politicians is going away. We are draining the swamp. These people have to go. And to be fair, John Thune, Mitch McConnell, they better be watching it very carefully because Cornyn's fate is exactly what awaits them. Because John Thune is the chief rhino in charge and he is sitting on both hands with the SAVE Act under his butt. And because of John Thune's negligence to whip the Senate correctly with a mandate from the base, Donald Trump had to cut an executive order on mail-in voting and voting in general. And I have talked about that EO before, but that executive order is designed to address a lot of what goes on in the SAVE Act. It's basically a replication of the SAVE Act. Trump's executive order regarding this specifically authorizes the federal to confirm voter eligibility. What he is doing with this, he is pushing forward federal law. This executive order is going to require states to submit lists of eligible voters in each state. You basically produce your voter rolls. The executive order further required the post office to only deliver mail-in ballots to confirmed eligible voters that were on the list provided by the state. I mentioned it a minute ago. I've discussed the executive order in depth, and I think it's going to hold up legal scrutiny. And why? It's because the executive order that Trump put through does not create a new rule or law. What it is doing, it is merely asking the states to comply with existing federal law. And understand that there are 20 to 25 states that are actively violating federal standards for elections. So while you want to watch the SAVE Act, even though it's not moving anywhere, you want to watch the executive order. That executive order from Trump will secure elections with or without the SAVE Act. And I'm pleased to report that that executive order survived its first legal challenge. And in full transparency, this whole thing with this executive order is going to end up at the Supreme Court because this is just how our society functions now. The Supreme Court has to get the final say in this. So what happened with Trump passed the executive order, a couple months ago? Well, Democrat lawyers had requested a preliminary injunction on that executive order. And that injunction that they asked for called for relief and a blocking of the executive order. Well, so this request for injunction was denied by a judge. And to be completely clear, that's a good thing, but this is procedural. The judge here is a U.S. District Court judge. That's where all this stuff starts in the appeals process. His name is Carl Nichols, who is a Trump appointee. That judge, Carl Nichols, denied this relief request because he reasoned that they didn't have standing. Nichols reasoned that the federal has not received any lists yet, so therefore no harm has been done. If no harm has been done, then there's no standing. Here's Judge Nichols, quote, Given that the executive order does not command the plaintiffs to do anything and that no agency has yet acted pursuant to the order in a way that could harm the plaintiffs, they have not suffered any harm at present, end quote. That is correct. They're doing this without even being harmed. They have to experience harm to litigate. That's called standing. No harm has occurred yet. But I'm telling you right now, watch this executive order, because this executive order is going to stand. Even if they show harm, which is going to be a tall bar for them, what is their argument? What is the argument that the Democrats are coming up with here? They're arguing in this whole executive order thing, they're basically arguing that they don't have to comply with federal law. Well, we have a whole supremacy clause thing that addresses that. That's what they're saying. The Democrat argument here is that states run elections, which is very true. States do run elections. However, states must meet minimum standards, establish standards by the federal, that they're not holding their end of the bargain up. These states are supposed to use the Department of Homeland Security and Social Security Administration database, because DHS and SSA should know who is a citizen, correct? The Social Security Administration should know who an American citizen is, because they send out checks. DHS should know, because it's the Department of Homeland Security, who's here legally and who isn't. So again, to be clear, these states are required through federal law to provide this information to the federal government. Provide the lists. Why do we have 20 to 25 states that are ignoring federal law? Again, provide the list so DHS and SSA can verify who's here and who's not. And the only reason that you can draw from that, why the states aren't compliant, is because their lists are not going to match what the federal has. And I think everybody listening to this knows that dead people get Social Security payouts. The states don't manage this correctly. Now, again, there are certain states that do. I mean, if you've got 25 states that are not doing it, that means there's 25 that are doing it. We can't have half compliance to federal law at the state level. And I guess an easier way to distill that down for the dimmest among us is that 20 plus states, 20 to 25 states, apparently don't want to verify who its citizens are. And the only reason you wouldn't want to verify who your own citizenry was is if you were incompetent or you were trying to commit fraud. This whole thing with the executive order on voting is a long way from over. But the Democrat Party, with their fraud machine in voting and these delinquent states, are really boxed in here. You're really boxed in because being asked to follow federal law is not an injury. But you watch this whole thing very closely. I think that this thing is going to get fast-tracked to the Supreme Court, and you're going to see this upheld. All the executive order does, again, is it's asking states to comply with existing federal law. This is a bomb waiting to go off, but keep watching it. It survived its first hurdle. I'll be watching it. So, switching gears, news dropped out of the sky the other day that the Foggy Dew is going to be tracking very closely. And I think anybody that listens to the show knows that I talk about law a lot on the show. Because if we don't have law, we don't have a country. Well, you don't have law, you don't have a country. But what we've seen rise up over the last 10 years or so is lawfare. Lawfare is really using the law as a weapon against your political opponents. That's what they do in banana republics. It's warfare, but by legal means. And what lawfare really does is it subverts the law and it degrades it. And really, if you start looking at it that way, what lawfare does is it damages the law irreparably. But I talked about 2024 and this whole thing with Biden in the prior segment, but 2024 really was the high watermark of lawfare in the United States. You saw it all displayed. You saw a parade of cartoon characters torch the law in 2024. People like Judge Ogeron, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, names you probably know well. Alvin Bragg was probably my favorite. Alvin Bragg bootstrapped misdemeanors into felonies. He charged Donald Trump with 34 felonies. 34 felonies for Donald Trump in the state of New York by Alvin Bragg. 34 felonies. And if you'll remember, Letitia James wasn't innocent in that either. Letitia James filed a civil case for $450 million. That's a spicy meatball. Overall, Donald Trump in 2024 was charged with 91 felonies, hundreds of millions of dollars in civil penalties. And I talked about it in the prior segment. Beyond all the ridiculous laundry list of felonies and fines that Trump was subjected to, you had a compliant media that was involved in all of that. It always goes back to the media. And again, look, if the media did its job, things like the Foggy Dew wouldn't exist. I do the Foggy Dew because I'm so tired of the media gaslighting everybody to their face and not being a real source of truth or news. Not that I'm the ultimate source of truth or news, but man, I'm a hell of a lot better about being honest. All the media does here is lie. The compliant media in 2024 ran a narrative in your face. They provided cover. The media that I cannot stand fawned over people like Alvin Bragg and Letitia James, feted them. They painted this picture to the American people like Alvin Bragg and Letitia James are just these two resolute defenders of jurisprudence in America, that somehow these two buffoons are the stalwart protectors of the realm. And of course, all of this is designed, it's positioned as a preponderance of implication. Well, it's 91 felony charges. And of course, 91 felony charges to Joe Blow in middle America is a lot. If you came up and told me somebody was charged with 91 felonies and I had my head buried in the sand, I'd be like, man, that guy must be guilty of something. And if you're some mouth breather CNN viewer who doesn't know anything, you watch CNN and they bring on legal experts to tell you that this is historic and Donald Trump must be guilty of something. Do you remember all this breathless? And it's night after night after night. Because, of course, with 91 felonies, where there's smoke, there's fire, man. But this entire thing is designed to trick the uninformed. It's designed to trick the uninformed or to cater to the partisan. Because if you hate Trump, like if you personally just hate Donald Trump, if you're a Republican, Democrat, if you hate Donald Trump or somehow you're just some rabid Democrat partisan, then all of this with 91 felonies is your confirmation. Charging Donald Trump with 91 felonies confirms your suspicion that Donald Trump is Hitler incarnate. 91 felony. I knew he was guilty. He's a bad man. You have these clowns, legal experts that come in from these law schools. These people teach law at universities. So they bring in these, well, this is a legal expert from Georgetown. This is a political science expert here's a former prosecutor attorney in the state of New York. It's all nonsense. They do it to paint a narrative. It's like bringing out doctors in white coats and COVID. Well, here's all these experts that tell you to wear a mask. It paints a narrative, and what it does is it fills in the blanks for people that already have a bias against someone. What they're doing, they're filling in the blanks. They're confirming your bias against Trump. And the whole world had to sit here and watch this spectacle, and that's really the best. It's a spectacle. It's a public flogging. That's really what it is. It's a public humiliation ritual, but really what it's doing at its core, it's dragging the law, it's dragging the presidency, dragging the country through the mud. You're dragging my kid's future through the mud for people like Alvin Bragg and Letitia James, two partisan low-life hacks. And to be fair, look, is Donald Trump an angel? No, he isn't. He's a flawed human being. He's a completely flawed human being. But the thing that I would tell you is I know about the law, and I know what a misdemeanor is, and I know what a felony is. And I know you don't bootstrap charges to take misdemeanors into felonies. And I know, like in the case of like a Letitia James, I know for a fact that you don't take a $450 million civil fine for day in, day out business in New York City. $450 million for what Donald Trump was doing there is completely bogus. And what I especially know is I know the media. I just talked about guys in white lab coats and COVID. I saw the media totally exposed in COVID. So this is the same CNN with a COVID death tracker. It's CNN with Sanjay Gupta and his merry band of science experts telling me that Donald Trump is a 91-time felon. It's no different than like an MSNBC. It's MSNBC sitting here telling me that Hunter Biden's laptop is fake. The same MSNBC that told you that Biden was cognizant. I mean, you just go down the list of their lies. So you have this media that's just burying themselves in bold-faced lies. Somehow I'm expected to believe that they got this one right with all the lawfare. That Donald Trump is a 91-time felon, that he did all these civil violations for hundreds of millions of dollars. So just this one time, I'm expected to suspend belief of the media being totally ridiculous to believe that Donald Trump is now a felon. Sorry, I'm not biting into your apple. Because it's just, to me, it's like the science experts in COVID are now doing a heel turn pivot to being legal masterminds with Alvin Bragg and Letitia James. This lawfare by people like Letitia James and Alvin Bragg would make Charlie Brown and the football blush. I mean, forgive me for my skepticism. And I guess I'll stop ranting. Why am I talking about lawfare? Why am I talking about this practice of law other than the fact that I just can't stand it? One of the main actors in 2024 lawfare was E. Jean Carroll. Well, E. Jean Carroll literally slithered out from under her rock and she's back in the news. So you might ask yourself, why is E. Jean Carroll back in the news? Well, good news to report that the Department of Justice has opened up an investigation into E. Jean Carroll. This whole thing with E. Jean Carroll was the legal cherry on top of the lawfare against Donald Trump in 2024. E. Jean Carroll was a magazine columnist who accused Donald Trump of rape. And for historical perspective, E. Jean Carroll joined the list of people that sprang up out of the ether to accuse a conservative of rape. She just sprang out of the tall grass. Rape, rape, rape. Here it is. Look at him. It's yet again another hazy rape smear on a conservative. She joins the ranks of Anita Hill, Christine Blasey Ford with Kavanaugh. But Carroll was even more insidious because Carroll was used as a prop in 2024. Because not only is Donald Trump a felon and a civil violator, he's also now a rapist. The problem with all of this, with Carroll specifically, I mean, forget about Bragg and James and all those people. The problem here was E. Jean Carroll herself. The problem with her identifying that the problem with her accusing Trump of this is that she couldn't tell you when this occurred. She didn't know what year this alleged rape occurred. So she didn't know the when, she didn't know the how, she didn't know the where. All she knew was the who. And that who was Donald Trump, the felon. And that the when part of this, meaning when it occurred, should have derailed this entire accusation of rape. You have to know the when. Trump is a public figure. He keeps a calendar. So if E. Jean Carroll can't tell me the year, the month, the day, the minute, if she can't provide a when, how is the defendant supposed to provide an alibi? Donald Trump couldn't even defend himself. If you look at the practice of law, in law, if you are accused of anything, you must have the ability as the accused to establish where you were at the time of the incident. You have to have that right to say, I was not in the place you're telling me I was at. I just mentioned it a second ago, Donald Trump has been a public figure for 50 years. If E. Jean Carroll couldn't provide the when, well, I don't even know what year it happened, but he's the one that did it. How could he even defend himself? If the accuser cannot say when, then the case should have been tossed out of court. The partisan judge, and that's exactly what it is. This idea that this judge is just some balls and strikes arbiter is so laughable. So you have this partisan judge allowing her to proceed with this, not providing any specificity on the when. And if you do that and you cannot have the accuser tell you when this occurred, then the accused then is denied due process. Donald Trump was denied due process with this whole thing with Carol. That entire situation with Carol escalated into a defamation lawsuit. So really what you had, if you want to distill this to brass tacks, here is Donald Trump with a case where he has no due process rights. He cannot defend himself procedurally. That is outrageous. So Donald Trump was denied due process. Denying due process is an assault on the Constitution. That is real lawfare. Due process is guaranteed in the Constitution. And the only thing I can tell you from history and law and political science, law without process is theater. And every first-year law student knows that. And all of these people are complicit in this assault on the Constitution. Leveling an accusation without facts, without a when, how can a verdict be achieved when process was denied? But I guess that wasn't the point, was it? The point was the smear. The point is the allegation. The point is the accusation. It's like all this stuff. It's a preponderance of implied guilt to bolster the viewer's confirmation bias. If you move beyond this entire situation and you say, okay, I'm going to take somebody that is accusing the president of something, but they can't say when, where, how, any of it. If you want to commit that type of offense, if you want to commit that type of lawfare, you need a rock solid person. And that's why Carol was a real problem for them. She was not the person for this accusation. And why is that? Because she's not credible. I have to believe if she's accusing me with no facts, that person needs to be credible. E. Jean Carroll looked and sounded like a freak. She lives with rodents in her house. She has profane names for her pets. She's talked publicly about her dog teaching her things. She said on TV that rape was sexy. And beyond that, the more damning thing is she had emails with a friend that implied that she wanted Donald Trump removed and jailed. And to be completely clear, normally freakish behavior, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But it does matter if there are no facts, because I then have to determine the credibility of the accuser, and she is not a credible person. Well, Carol has more problems. Here's her problem now. E. Jean Carroll swore, she put her hand on a Bible and swore in a courtroom that nobody paid her to do this, that nobody funded her, bankrolled her, whatever. That was her that was her sworn testimony in court. The problem with that? She lied. E. Jean Carroll committed perjury. And I'm telling you right now, E. Jean Carroll's going to go to jail. I just said it a second. She swore in a Bible that nobody paid her. Listen to this quote. Quote, federal prosecutors are looking at a 2022 videotape deposition statement in which Carroll said she did not get any outside funding for her lawsuit against Trump. It was later made public that billionaire Reid Hoffman had covered some of Carroll's expenses and legal fees, end quote. A 2022 deposition, stated videotape deposition, where she did not get any outside funding. It was later made public that billionaire Reid Hoffman had covered some of Carroll's expenses. That's perjury, man. She's on a video saying that she was paid by Reid Hoffman. And then she goes out, she says that in a sworn deposition and then testifies in a court of law that nobody paid her. And Reid Hoffman is a total scumbag. If you don't know Reid Hoffman is the guy that founded LinkedIn. He's a billionaire. And the crazy thing about Reid Hoffman is a reported Epstein associate. And now it's coming out from the Department of Justice with this whole thing is that Reid Hoffman apparently didn't just help a little bit. He paid for absolutely everything here. He paid for all of it on his own dime. He bankrolled this entire. So if you're asking me today, I think E. Jean Carroll's going to go to jail. She forgot that she got paid. I mean, I guess maybe she thought she wouldn't get caught. Maybe she thought Kamala Harris was going to win. And if Kamala Harris wins, it all gets swept away. She would get her 30 pieces of silver and go live a life of luxury. But if you distill this down into really what this is lawfare 101. Lying in court on a bogus accusation. That seems pretty cut and dry to me. It seems pretty cut and dry to me that she committed perjury. But the real issue is the damage is done, though, isn't it? Because E. Jean Carroll comes out with this, and what happens? The media runs with the story. The narrative is now set. The liberal narrative is in place. And the pivot now, the pivot today, after this whole thing about E. Jean Carroll comes out, what are they saying? What are they saying about Trump now? That he's sending the DOJ out after his accusers. Look at Hitler. Look at Hitler weaponizing the Department of Justice. Hitler is going after his accusers. And of course he's Hitler because he's a felon and a rapist. What they're saying Donald Trump is doing with this E. Jean Carroll thing in the Department of Justice is that Donald Trump now is attacking this innocent whistleblower. The pivoting here and the mental gymnastics are so gross. And this is exactly why the Democrat Party and liberals broadly, they want a factual agreement before engaging you in a conversation. What they want is a narrative agreement. To have a conversation with a liberal or a Democrat, you must agree to their facts. You must agree to a narrative. You must agree that Donald Trump is a Russian agent because Rachel Maddow said so, that COVID came from a wet market. They do it all the time. Will you admit that 2020 was legit and Joe Biden was the duly elected president? What? You must agree that January 6th was worse than 9/11 and Pearl Harbor combined. You must agree that Donald Trump is a felon and a racist. They want the narrative control. It's a cartoon, man. It's a theater narrative by theater kids. And the only thing I can tell you, just looking at history, a lie gets around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. And that's the whole point. They want to get, it's narrative control. They want to create a narrative, and then you can't assail it after the fact, even though everybody can see it. It's the same thing with Biden on the debate stage. It's just on display for your own two. Don't believe your lying eyes. And I guess beyond the lawfare and this whole ridiculous E. Jean Carroll person, you really have to wonder about a person like Reid Hoffman. And I guess the question is, why would Reid Hoffman do that? And the only conclusion you could unless he just hates Donald Trump, that he has all this money, that he can do whatever he wants, maybe a person like Reid Hoffman needed Donald Trump out of the picture. And why would Reid Hoffman want Trump out of the picture? Well, you can't have Donald Trump looking at Epstein. You can't have any real sunlight on what goes on in our government. Because if Donald Trump's going to go look at Epstein, that really means that what you're doing is you're looking at a person like Reid Hoffman. Bill Gates is another guy too. And I guess you might ask yourself, is that why they did all this lawfare? Is that why they pilloried Trump for 10 years in the media? They lawfared him out of his mind. Why they tried to kill him? Why they rigged 2020? Is that why they did it? Is it because of Epstein? And the question that I've asked on the Foggy Dew before is, what interest does Donald Trump threaten? And that's the question you have to ask yourself, because the problem that I have with it, I talked about it with Jill Biden. I'm talking about it with E. Jean Carroll. This is all a pattern in the media. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. It becomes totally obvious. And this is why I urge you to always watch the response. This whole charade that we've been subjected to, this whole charade damages the country in ways we can't even understand yet. It diminishes. If you don't have law, you don't have a country. And what these people did is they diminished the law because they don't care about it. They diminished the law. They diminished the office of the president. They diminished the country. Judges are complicit. Lawyers are complicit. Law professors on CNN are complicit. The media is complicit. It's just partisans burning the house down because they didn't get their way. Anyway, look, E. Jean Carroll's going to go to jail. I don't know how she gets out of this, because obviously she committed perjury if they have her on video saying that she wasn't paid, and then testifying that she was paid, and then she lies in court and says she wasn't. But and I guess that's the point. So what? She goes to jail. That doesn't matter now. So E. Jean Carroll really, she's not going to enjoy her 30 pieces of silver and $1 million parachute. She's going to go to jail as a Democrat prop. And the damage has been done to the country, which is really the point. And it's really the problem. But trust me, I'll be watching what goes on with E. Jean Carroll very closely, but always, always, always watch the media, guys. Okay, I am going to be out of town all next week. I think I might have mentioned that earlier in the show. So hopefully you enjoyed the show this week, and I'll be back after next week, and we'll get more content out for you. But just keep watching us on Spotify. So I'll go ahead and wrap up. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew, signing off.